the stories, the journey, the wild behind the scenes, and much more. I'm Dave Anthony, and I'm the host of From Garage to Stadiums. Welcome to Garage to Stadiums. Today's story is about the band Fleetwood Mac. Whether you're a casual fan or a Mac diehard, what you're about to hear is an incredible story. As you'll learn, Fleetwood Mac has had 3 very different eras over their history, and if you can believe it, over 18 different band members. If you do know the band, you probably know the classic lineup of the mid to late 70s with Mick Fleetwood on drums, John McVie on bass guitar, Christine McVie on keyboards and vocals, Lindsey Buckingham on guitar and vocals, and Stevie Nicks on vocals. Once you hear this episode, I think you'll agree that this band has an absolute soap opera of interband romantic relationships, breakups, drug addictions, band breakups. They even had one member leave the band to join a cult. And yet to this day, Fleetwood Mac remains one of the most successful groups of all time. Even if you're just a casual fan, you'll recognize their staple mainstream radio hits, Dreams, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, Landslide, and You Make Loving Fun. Fleetwood Mac's pinnacle album, the 1977 titled Rumors, won a Grammy as the top album of that year and placed them in the Stadium Superstar bracket as one of the top rock bands of the mid to late 70s. Our guest today will tell you the inside story of the incredible emotional atmosphere and turmoil around the creation of that stunning album. When they first started, Fleetwood Mac was a group heading down a completely different music style path, almost unrecognizable to the subsequent radio hits that we all recognize. Talent, tragedy, incredible strokes of fate, and perseverance have all come together to create one of the most iconic sounds in the history of rock. This band has sold a monumental 120 million plus albums. You'll even hear today how the song I just mentioned, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, was even used as a campaign song in a US presidential election. To tell us the story of Fleetwood Mac, we have today's guest, Mark Blake. Mark is an author who's written about music since 1989. He's authored books on bands like The Who, Queen, Pink Floyd, and Led Zeppelin. His book on Zeppelin, called Bring It On Home, was named Music Book of the Year by The Times, The Daily Mail, and Daily Telegraph newspapers in the UK. His upcoming book, Dreams, is coming out this coming fall, and Garage to Stadium listeners today have the early privilege of hearing about its insider details. Mark is joining us from London in the UK. Welcome to Garage to Stadiums, Mark.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mark, you've written books on some iconic groups and personalities, as we mentioned in the intro. Fleetwood Mac is obviously a fascinating story. Tell us why you personally chose them as a book subject.
Well, I was talking about doing it a few years ago, and it never got off the ground then. And that was because I did an interview with Peter Green, the guitarist of Fleetwood Mac, who subsequently died and who famously sort of left the band under quite difficult, tragic circumstances, really. I think it turned out to be the last interview he ever did, or the last magazine interview he ever did. And I kind of was sitting on that for a while. And what I realized is, going back to about 1996, 97, I'd interviewed the members of Fleetwood Mac so many times. I'd gone to the States with them when they reformed in the late 90s. And I'd done lots of things with all of them since then. And I just had a load of material. I thought it was a great story.
Right. What was your process for gathering material insights? Was it mostly interview-based?
Interview-based, yeah, reading around the subject. I mean, I'd spoken to a couple of the producers and engineers that had worked with them. It's basically just dragging all this source material together and trying to knock it into some kind of shape.
So you're able to get to each member eventually, or just historically?
No, historically. They don't cooperate with books or anything. Well, no, because they'll write their own and get paid more money to do so.
Right.
I mean, Mick Fleetwood's done 2. He's done 2.
That's true.
So he goes bankrupt, he does another one. So.
We're going to get
to the same. I would do exactly the same.
Yeah, we're going to get to some of those interesting facts in a moment. Fleetwood Mac started way back in 1967. But before we get into the specifics of the band, I'd like you, Mark, to set the stage for our listeners of what it was like in England in the early to mid 60s, the type of music that was sort of pervasive at the day.
Well, they were part of what was called the sort of blues boom, R&B, British R&B boom, which is basically, in many cases, working class or middle class white English or British kids that became absolutely fascinated by Black American music. America wasn't really interested, but the British were. So they were totally into Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Boy Williamson. And that's where the Stones, to certainly less so the Beatles, but the Stones, the Yardbirds, that's where those bands came from. Obviously, there was pop music as well. There was Elvis, Buddy Holly, that kind of stuff, and Cliff Richard and the Shadows, who was our sort of watered down version of Elvis. So there was all this stuff going on, and that sort of inspired the members of what became Fleetwood Mac. Most of them were big Buddy Holly fans, but also big blues fans, and there was this fascination with blues. It was a hip thing to be into. Right. It was difficult to get hold of those records. They weren't played on the radio. They had to be bought as imports. So that makes anything more attractive. If it's slightly taboo or it's slightly hidden and it requires some thought, that was part of the popularity, I think, of blues. It was difficult music to get hold of, and it was seen as authentic. So what you had is these kind of white middle-class English boys, and it was often boys, trying to copy, their Black American heroes.
Right. It's very fascinating that obviously the Black musicians were unknown to white America. White English men primarily play the music and then export it back to the US.
It sold it back to you, yeah. I mean, it's hilarious. The Rolling Stones, it's very funny.
Unbelievable.